So, fear. It is, one definition of fear is that it is an unpleasant sense that someone or something might be dangerous, pose a threat, or cause pain, suffering, and death. This is what fear is. And the disciples in this story are dealing with some very serious fear. And we'll get into that in a minute. Now, we all know, we've all experienced fear, right? We've all been there. Athletes experience fear, and they have to overcome it in order to be able to do the things they need to do. For example, in football, right? The guy who runs out and catches the ball, the wide receiver, he goes out and he's in the middle of the field, he's prepared to catch a ball, but he also recognizes he may be hit from behind right at that moment with the power of like a Mack truck. And he has to stay focused and still catch that ball no matter what happens. And he has to have faith, somehow faith that he can catch it and that he will be able to live to play another down. Faith, fear. Musicians have it. They deal with faith and fear all the time. Particularly jazz musicians or any musicians that riff a lot, that depend on being able to experience music in the moment. And there's a certain magic to that, and to be able to riff and to be able to improvise and to be able to respond back and forth and create music as it goes is tricky. And there's a fear that it may just not work, and sometimes it doesn't. We've all experienced something called call reluctance. Certainly salespeople have. You know, the fear of making a call, and I'm not going to sell. I'm going to be rejected. But as we even think about our ministries here at St. John, and we talk about reaching out to people who we should contact, we may have some call reluctance in that. I really should call Margot. I've been saying this on and off for the last few months, but I don't do it. And why don't I do it? There may be some fear. I'm afraid to hear what Margot has to say. It may impact my life in a way that I don't want it to. I'm comfortable where I am. Some things are better not heard or seen. I just want my peace. Pastors deal with fear in developing certain types of sermons. They are the types of sermons that generally advocate for elements of the piece to be applied in a broader contextual way, to be applied in more of a systemic way. And these types of expressions of the piece cause some people great discomfort, particularly if they don't agree. And it's at that point that the pastor is accused of being too political. Okay? It happens, and it's not necessarily comfortable. But here's the thing, folks. If we really stop and we reflect on the time, the space that Jesus worked, how he preached, how he worked, there's no question that Jesus is advocating peace in a societal way. The challenges that were faced in Palestine at that time were significant. And if his people were to experience peace, many things would have to change. And it's fair to say, when we think about that from a modern perspective, it is a reasonable thing to say that Jesus was a political activist at that moment to that society in the world of Palestine, and how those words were received. can't see that, my friends. The very nature of this lesson has fully lost its salt. Now, in a very short time, this is early into Jesus' ministry, he does, in fact, upset the authorities. They don't like how he's interpreting the law. They are uncomfortable, and they are particularly uncomfortable because he is stirring things up, and lots of people are starting to listen to him. And that's frightening, particularly if you have something to lose. I don't want to change my life. I like it just the way it is. But this gospel message of Jesus, it shakes the very foundations of that societal structure. It does. Now, in ancient literature, chaos is often represented by storms or large bodies of water. Jesus' ministry is creating chaos. That's what's happening. And if we take a step back and reflect on the community that would have heard this message for the very first time, the community that Mark, the gospel writer, is writing to, what we would recognize is that the backdrop is the fact that in the midst of this writing, we see the Great Revolt taking place. Hundreds of thousands of people throughout Palestine are dying as they attempted to fight against Rome. The temple is about to fall, or it has already fallen. And certainly the people who are hearing this message for the first time, who are Jewish, coming into this way, are filled with fears and concern, and are living in a world of chaos. Now, of course, the disciples were afraid of getting hurt, and by the time this gospel is written and heard for the first time, most of them have been martyred. They're dead already. All of their fears have been realized. And so, the story goes. Jesus, sleeping in a boat. The boat, from Jesus' perspective, is the safety of his mission. Everything is fully in place, even if the waters are troubling. The disciples, they become afraid at the rough going, and Jesus wakes up and he calms the storm. The power of peace calms the chaos when it's applied directly. But it takes unwavering faith to stand up against the strongest storms. Jesus realizes that the disciples' faith is not fully formed yet. It's not there. He sees and he witnesses there's way too much fear in place. How is this message going to impact my life? He recognizes he has to work more and more with his disciples. And again, it's relatively early into the ministry. We've heard about the coin of faith, right? The coin on one side is faith, the other side is fear. Faith or fear? Which way do we go? Do we work with faith or do we give in to fear? Jesus always talks about the distinction between the kingdom and the world. Now, I've heard it said that the world is where selfishness is practiced. What's in it for me? How do I get the best advantage for my side? and without a whole lot of consideration for the competition. And the kingdom is simply the practice of peace. We could apply all the same kinds of activities and actions, but apply them and direct them in the ways of peace and getting things done a little bit differently. Now, new followers of Jesus then and even now need to learn how to overcome fear. We live in the world. What Jesus is talking about, if properly applied, can create some pushback. Do we join in what's going on in the world, or we say, you know what, I'm going to go a different way? So the question becomes for each of us, what do I put my faith into? What do I have faith in? Do we have more faith in our financial planners or Jesus? It's a question. Do we have more faith in political parties and politicians or Christ? Peace, fear. Where do we go? Do we have more faith in what we call our country or God? Do we step back and see the overwhelming differences? The world or the kingdom? There is a lot to be feared in our nation right now because we are not collectively working in the peace. We are too absorbed in pot-shotting one another. That's kind of where we are. We've lost the ability to reason, to reflect, become aware of the complexity of the life in which we live. Now, we've been told by many that you don't have enough. Of course you don't have enough. You need more. You need more. You need this. You need that. That's what you need. You need it. Do we need it? Or do we need something else? The fear that we are dealing with in the world is manufactured to gain a response. It's an old ploy. It's gone on a long time. But we got to read between the lines. Now, the good news is this. We can choose. We can choose to be compassionate, or we can simply be blind to the needs of others and go on our merry way saying everything's just fine. We can be forgiving, or we can be full of revenge. And I'm going to tell you, if revenge wins, everybody loses in ways you can't even imagine. Are we willing to be generous, or to believe that we can never have enough? It's a choice. Are we willing to be merciful toward others, or judge and condemn them if they don't agree with us? These are all things that we have the opportunity to choose. And a lot of these choices that we may make could strike fear in our hearts. I don't like the choice. This is uncomfortable. If I go one way or another, I don't like to have to make these choices. I want God in a box, the God of my own understanding, or other scholars' understanding that accept my understanding, or I let this thing roll out, and I let it live, and I let it breathe, and I recognize what's going on today, and the opportunity we have as people of God to say, wait a minute, slow down. Each one of you, each one of us has the ability to be a point of light. And so the good news, my friends, is that you have the capability and potential to be the good news. And I think we can give thanks to God for that, because he is risen. Amen.